My name is John, and I'm 35 years old. It's not a particularly remarkable age, but it feels like the one where life starts to make sense in ways you didn't expect. I've been working in the system analytics business for more than a decade now, and while I might not have the adrenaline rush of startups or the glamour of big deals, I've built something steady, something reliable. I've carved out a career where I'm known for my methodical approach, solving problems one step at a time. Predictable? Yes. Safe? Yes. But it works for me. Jason and I met back in college where he was everything I wasn't. Loud, spontaneous, the type of guy who could walk into a room and turn every head. I was quieter, more introverted, content with my books and my projects. He was always looking for the next big thing, the next big opportunity. He was driven by a hunger for something bigger. Bigger risks, bigger rewards, bigger stories to tell. Me, I was content to work with what was in front of me, dig deeper into what I already knew, and build a solid foundation. We were friends, of course. Our differences never got in the way. There was a kind of balance in it, a mutual understanding that even though we were pursuing different paths, we both respected each other's choices. He'd often tell me I was too careful, that you'll never shoot, or that you don't know how to take risks. It was said with that same easy, confident smile of his, but it always felt like a challenge, like he was daring me to prove him wrong. I never did. I don't think I ever wanted to. Taking risks, leaping into unknowns, it never appealed to me in the way it did to him. I was never the guy who could make a sudden decision and throw everything I had into it. I like to think things through, to weigh the possibilities, to be certain that the choice I was making was the right one. And maybe that made me seem too safe in his eyes. But it worked for me. My life, my career, everything felt solid. Jason, on the other hand, seemed to live in a constant state of motion. It was as if he was always on the edge of something, always chasing the next venture, the next big idea. He didn't know how to be still, and I think that was part of his charm, the reason people liked him so much. He was the kind of person you couldn't ignore, the one you couldn't help but watch as he went after whatever new thing was on the horizon. I couldn't help but admire his energy. He was relentless in his pursuit of success, always moving, always striving for something bigger than the day before. And there was something about that constant motion that felt unsettling to me. Not because I didn't respect him, but because I knew I couldn't keep up. So we stayed friends. We didn't talk all the time, but when we did, it was like no time had passed. We picked up right where we left off, talking about everything and nothing. And in those moments, I would listen to him talk about his ventures, his startups, his latest projects, and I'd feel a little bit of envy. Not for his success or the lifestyle he was chasing, but for his ability to jump, to leap without looking. It was something I couldn't do. But then something happened, something I wasn't expecting. It was 2 years ago when I first got an email from Jason. I just finished my morning cup of coffee when my inbox chimed with a new message. I opened it, expecting another update on one of his latest projects, maybe another pitch deck or an idea he was throwing around. But what I saw made me pause. It was a presentation, slick, polished, filled with bold, optimistic words like disruption, innovative, and revolutionary. A platform that would change everything. And there at the bottom was Jason's signature. But this time, it wasn't like the old days. He wasn't asking for my opinion or just sharing his excitement. He was selling it to me. I read through it slowly, my fingers hovering over the keys as I processed the details. There were projections, metrics, claims of massive market potential. It all sounded familiar. Too familiar, actually. I glanced at the final line of the email, and there it was. But it probably won't work for you. You're not like that. There it was again. The dismissal, the knowing, the belief that I wasn't the kind of person who could take a leap, that I wouldn't be the one to jump in, no matter how much I cared about the details or the structure. For a moment, I sat there staring at that sentence. It wasn't the first time Jason had said something like that to me. In fact, it was almost the same words he'd used when we were in college, back when I would sit with him, listening to him talk about his big ideas, his big plans, and how he was going to change the world. He'd laugh and tell me, "You're too careful, John. You'll never shoot." And now here I was, faced with another one of his big ideas, wrapped in flashy charts and promises of something revolutionary. And I wasn't even sure how to respond. I could hear his voice in my head, that confident, almost cocky tone. "It won't suit you. You're not like that." But for the first time, something shifted in me. It wasn't anger or frustration, but a calm realization. I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to take risks just because someone else thought I was too careful. And so I did what I always did. I asked the questions, the right questions. How are you protecting the data? What about privacy? What's the backup plan if this goes wrong? His reply was typical. He brushed it off with a laugh. "John, it's not about that. It's about the vision. The execution comes later." I closed the email without replying. Instead, I let the message sit there, unread for a day. It wasn't that I didn't trust him. It was just that I couldn't ignore the feeling that this wasn't the right move for me. It wasn't about playing it safe. It was about knowing when the risks weren't worth taking, and I wasn't willing to take that one. 2 years passed. The world, as it often does, kept moving forward, spinning on its axis, while I remained in my corner, doing what I always did, analyzing systems, optimizing processes, and investing cautiously in projects I could believe in. It wasn't glamorous. There were no headlines, but there were steady returns, small victories, and the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing you were building something that would last. Jason, meanwhile, seemed to be living a completely different life. His name popped up from time to time in my inbox, but the messages were nothing like before. His updates were more erratic now, an occasional email, a quick phone call, all with an air of urgency that I didn't understand. He was still chasing the next big thing, but I noticed a change in his tone. The once bright-eyed optimism had dimmed. His emails no longer had that same punch. Instead of, "We're going to change the world," they were filled with technical talk and requests for advice. Still ambitious, yes, but now there was something a little more desperate beneath the surface. And then one day it came again. I was sitting at my desk, just finishing a report when I saw a new email notification. I opened it, expecting more of the same. A new pitch, a new venture. What I wasn't expecting was the subject line. A platform that will blow up the market. It was as if time had folded back on itself, and I was suddenly transported 2 years earlier to that moment when Jason had first pitched his idea. But this time, there was something different in the email. The subject, the tone, the language. It wasn't as polished. It was rougher, almost desperate. It lacked the confidence of the first pitch. The email itself was filled with the same buzzwords, the same promises of revolutionizing the market. But this time, there was no glossy brochure, no flashy PowerPoint. Instead, there were some poorly formatted charts, a couple of hastily scribbled figures, and a line of text that made me stop reading for a moment. "But it probably won't work for you. You're not like that." I stared at the words for a long time. There it was again, that phrase. But this time, it didn't sting. It didn't provoke the same old frustration that had been there 2 years ago. Now, it just felt like an observation, one that had lingered for too long. I didn't rush to reply. Instead, I let it sit in my inbox for a couple of days. And during that time, I thought about the first time he had sent me something like this. The high-energy pitch, the grand promises, the bold ideas. Jason had always been the one to push boundaries, to ignore the small details in pursuit of something bigger. But I had learned by then that the small details mattered. I could hear his voice in my head, just as clearly as if he were standing beside me. "You're too careful, John. You'll never shoot. You don't know how to take risks." I could almost feel the weight of that challenge again, the weight of his expectations, but I also knew I had changed. I wasn't the same person I had been back in college, the one who sat back and let others charge ahead without question. I had learned over the years to trust my instincts. I had built something solid, something reliable, and I wasn't willing to risk that just for the thrill of the chase. Still, I couldn't deny that the idea lingered. I kept thinking about the presentation. I kept thinking about what he'd said, how he always viewed me as too careful. I knew Jason well enough to understand that he would never give up, never stop pushing forward. But the real question was, Was it enough to make me change my mind? Was it enough to make me take a leap of my own? In the end, I decided to respond. Calmly, methodically, the way I always did. I wrote back a simple question. How are you protecting the data? What about privacy? What's the backup plan if this doesn't work out? It was a quiet challenge, nothing flashy. I didn't expect much of an answer, but I also knew I needed to ask. I wasn't going to just sign on to something without understanding it thoroughly. Jason replied almost immediately. The tone was familiar, the same old reassurance, the same sort of breezy confidence. It's not about that, John. It's about the vision, the potential. We'll figure out the rest. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. The same words, the same approach. He was still the same Jason, still trying to sell the dream, but something had shifted. This time I didn't reply. Instead, I closed the email and thought about it for a while. Jason had asked for my money, my trust, but I realized something important. I had already made my decision, not because I was afraid to take risks, but because I had learned to take the right risks. And this one? This one wasn't it. The months passed, and Jason's email faded into the background. I continued on with my routine, steady, predictable, comfortable. There were no headlines, no drama, just steady progress. I had been fortunate, building a portfolio of investments that weren't showy, but were reliable. A logistics company here, a promising accounting platform there. My business partners and I had our systems running smoothly. I wasn't rich in the traditional sense. No yachts, no private jets. But I had enough. Enough to live comfortably, enough to keep things moving forward, and enough to feel secure in my own skin. Meanwhile, Jason's name kept cropping up in my inbox, though never with the same frequency. Every now and then, I would hear from him with a quick update. Nothing substantial, nothing groundbreaking. I didn't have to guess what was happening. I knew. He was still in the trenches, trying to build something bigger than himself. But now it was different. There was a quiet desperation in his words, the same energy that used to feel bold and optimistic now felt worn, almost pleading. Then one day, nearly a year and a half later, I received another email. This one had a simple subject line. Brother, can we meet? I didn't hesitate. I knew what it meant. I knew what he was asking for. This wasn't about catching up. It wasn't a friendly chat. No, this was a business meeting. Plain and simple. Jason was looking for something. Money, support, maybe even redemption. I stared at the message for a long time before deciding to reply. Sure, I thought. We can meet. A few days later, I found myself sitting across from Jason at a small cafe near his office. He looked different, though it took me a moment to pinpoint exactly how. He was still in his usual casual dress, jeans and untucked shirt, the kind of outfit that had always given him that startup guy vibe. But his eyes were tired, his face drawn. There were lines now that hadn't been there before, the faint hint of exhaustion. His hands, always so animated before, were now fidgeting, tracing invisible lines on the table. Hey, John, he said, his voice a little softer than I remembered. Jason, I nodded, trying to keep things casual. He wasted no time getting to the point. I need your help, he said, not looking me in the eye as he placed a tablet in front of me. I know you're going to think it's crazy, but I've been working on something, and I think this is the one. I really do. I took the tablet in my hands, scrolling through a series of charts and projections. The numbers looked familiar. The language was the same. But there was something else now, a certain weariness in the figures, a hint of failure behind the glossy veneer. I could tell that Jason had poured his heart into this project, but it was clear that things weren't going according to plan. Where's the data protection? I asked, my voice even, calm. Jason laughed, though there was no humor in it. You really haven't changed, have you? He leaned back in his chair, as if the question had almost surprised him. You're still asking the same thing, but you don't get it, John. The world's changing, and I'm trying to keep up. It's not about playing it safe anymore. You've got to take risks. I nodded, taking a moment before replying. I had heard this all before. The take risks mantra, the change the world pitch. It always sounded so convincing in theory, but I had learned the hard way that the world didn't change because of a few flashy ideas. It changed because people worked steadily, because they took calculated steps towards something real. You haven't changed either, Jason, I said, my tone calm but firm. Now you're knocking on my door instead of just calling me up. He paused, the weight of my words sinking in. I know, he said quietly, looking down at the table. I should have done this a long time ago, but I didn't want to admit it, that I needed help, that I couldn't do it alone. But now, his voice trailed off as he looked up at me, his eyes searching, hopeful, like he was trying to read my face. I'm not asking for a handout. I just need a bridge, something to keep this going, you know? If you could help me get back on my feet, I know I could turn it around. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I set the tablet down on the table, studying him. Jason had always been the one to take the risks, to go after the next big thing, to throw everything he had into a dream. And I had always been the one to watch, the one who calculated, who took the measured path. But now as I sat there across from him, I realized something important. It wasn't about the project anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about something deeper, something that neither of us had acknowledged before. The simple truth that we had both changed. I wasn't the man he thought I was, and he wasn't the man he used to be either. But neither of us could go back, and there was something powerful in that. Jason shifted in his seat, looking at me with an air of quiet expectation. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the table, a subconscious movement, the kind of nervous energy that comes when you're waiting for someone to make a decision that will change everything. I could feel the weight of his gaze, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting immediately. Instead, I sat back and studied him, letting the silence stretch between us. I'd been in enough meetings over the years to recognize the tension. This was no longer about business, not just about a new venture or a risky project. This was something more personal. I could see it in the way his eyes darted around, as if he was searching for something. Reassurance, validation, maybe even forgiveness. Jason, I finally said, my voice steady. You know, when I first met you, you were all about the next big thing. You were always pushing the limits, trying to get ahead of the curve. But look at you now. You've come back to me, asking for help. He winced as if the words stung, but he didn't interrupt. You've been betting on these big ideas, these huge dreams. But none of them ever panned out, did they? I asked, my gaze steady. Jason shifted again, rubbing his face with his hands. No, they didn't, he admitted, his voice quieter now. But that's how it works, right? You've got to fail before you can succeed. Every great entrepreneur has a failure or two under their belt. I gave a slow nod. I get that, but there's a difference between failing because you push the limits and failing because you didn't plan for the things that matter. You didn't think through the basics, things like protecting the data, keeping your system secure, making sure your product actually fits the market. You were so focused on the next big thing that you missed the things that keep it together. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. But that's why I need you, John. That's why I'm here. You're the one who knows how to build things. You're the one who understands how to create something solid. I thought I could do it on my own, but I can't. I need someone like you who thinks things through, who takes the time to get the details right. His voice was earnest now, but it wasn't just the words he was saying. It was the way he was looking at me, as if he was trying to convey everything without saying it outright. I took a deep breath. Jason, I began slowly, you've changed. You've come to me now, not with the same pitch or the same dream. You've come to me with the reality of failure, and you're asking for help. That's different. He didn't say anything, just watched me carefully, waiting for the next words to come. I could hear the quiet hum of the cafe around us, the clink of cups, the distant murmur of conversation. It was all so normal, so ordinary, and yet here we were, two friends, once so sure of their own path, now standing at the intersection of a decision that could change everything. I'm not going to invest in this project, I said, finally meeting his eyes. There was a brief flash of disappointment, but Jason didn't argue. He had learned over the years that I wasn't someone who made decisions lightly. I had never been one for spontaneous risks, never one to jump into something without understanding it thoroughly. I've been in your shoes, you know, I added. I've had my share of setbacks. I've been tempted to chase after something that seemed bigger than what I had, something that promised all the answers. But I've also learned that the real work is in the details. It's in the execution. And this project, it's not about the dream anymore. It's about getting the basics right. Jason sat back, his shoulders slumping just a little. The energy that had been there, the urgency, seemed to drain from him. He looked older in that moment, the weight of his struggles settling on his face. "I get it," he said quietly. "I guess I've been trying to convince myself that I'm still that guy, the one who could make it happen no matter what. But maybe I'm not." There was no bitterness in his voice, no resentment. It was a simple acknowledgement of reality, a quiet acceptance of the fact that things weren't going the way he'd hoped. "I don't know what's next for me," Jason continued, looking down at the tablet in front of him, the numbers and charts now feeling hollow. "I don't know if I'll ever get another shot like this, but I had to ask. I had to try." I didn't say anything for a moment, letting the silence stretch. There was no anger, no triumph, just the quiet understanding between us that things had changed. "Jason," I said after a while, "you're still looking for that big break. But maybe it's not about the big break anymore. Maybe it's about doing the work, building something real." He met my gaze then, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Something like clarity. We sat in silence for a while longer, both of us knowing that this meeting was more than just about business. It was about acknowledging the paths we had chosen, the lives we had built, and the ways we had changed. When I stood up to leave, Jason didn't follow me out the door. He just sat there, staring at the tablet, his fingers running over the familiar charts and graphs. I left the cafe without looking back, but the moment stuck with me. It wasn't just a conversation about money or investments. It was a conversation about change, about what happens when you stop chasing the next big thing and start building something solid instead. It had been a month since that conversation, a month since Jason had come to me, looking for help, and I had said no. I'd kept working, kept focusing on the projects I had already built, things that were steady, things that I could trust. But it wasn't just business as usual. Every so often, my mind would drift back to that meeting, not to the words we exchanged, but to the way Jason had looked, defeated but not defeated. There was something humbling about it, something real. He wasn't the loud, brash guy anymore. He wasn't asking for miracles, just a lifeline. And when I said no, it wasn't out of spite. It was because I knew deep down he didn't need another risky venture. What he needed was a foundation, something he hadn't bothered to build in all these years of chasing after the next big thing. A couple of weeks later, I received a call. "John," the voice on the other end said, "it's Sam, Jason's CTO." I didn't recognize the name immediately, but then it clicked. Jason had mentioned him briefly during our conversation. "I wanted to meet with you, if you have time," Sam continued. "I'm interested in exploring some opportunities at your company." I paused for a moment. "What happened to Jason's startup?" I asked. "Well, as you can imagine, things didn't quite go as planned," Sam said, a slight chuckle in his voice. "But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here because I believe I can add value to what you're doing." I agreed to meet him, though I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. I had no intention of offering him a position right away, but curiosity got the better of me. When we sat down, Sam was direct. He told me about his experience with Jason's project, how the vision had been exciting, the potential enormous, but the execution had been lacking. "I know Jason doesn't exactly have the best track record with you," Sam said, looking me in the eye, "but I think I can do better. I'm not looking for a miracle. I just want a place where I can work with people who understand that the devil is in the details." It was the first time I'd heard someone else speak about Jason's failures without any bitterness, any blame. It was simply a statement of fact. It made me think about the way Jason had approached everything, his blind ambition, his willingness to leap without thinking about the landing. But Sam had learned from those failures. He understood the importance of getting the foundations right. I knew exactly what I was dealing with. "All right, Sam," I said, leaning back in my chair. "We'll give it a shot. We've got room for someone like you here." He smiled, and just like that, we began to discuss the terms. It wasn't a grand decision, not one that felt particularly dramatic. It was just a step forward, a natural move in the course of business. Sam started working with us shortly after, his quiet expertise becoming an integral part of our team. A few days after Sam started, I found myself sitting at my desk, flipping through some of the old papers on my desk. One of them was a folder that had been gathering dust, a folder with the old pitch deck Jason had sent me 2 years ago, the one that I had politely ignored. I picked it up, looked at the bold title on the cover, and then opened it. There it was, the same idea, the same graphs, the same projections. Jason's dream, frozen in time. I smiled to myself, flipping to the last page. That's when I noticed something. Beneath the final slide, Jason had written a note to me, a postscript, just like the one he had added to the original email. But it probably won't work for you. You're not like that. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now reading it again, the words struck me differently. In some ways, they were true. I wasn't like that. I wasn't the guy who chased after dreams without thinking them through, who took risks for the sake of the rush. But I had learned over the years that it wasn't about avoiding risk entirely. It was about taking calculated risks, understanding what I could control and what I couldn't. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Risk is not a cry, it's a calculation. I didn't make a big deal of it. I didn't call anyone's attention to it. But when Sam came into my office the next morning, I handed him the folder. He looked at it curiously but didn't comment. It wasn't about showing Jason I was right. It wasn't about proving anything. It was just a quiet acknowledgement of how far I had come, how far we all had come. And in the end, that was all I needed. Jason never contacted me again. He probably didn't need to. He had his own path now, and I had mine. I heard through the grapevine that he had moved on to a new project, one that seemed a little more grounded, a little more thoughtful, but it didn't matter anymore. I was no longer the one being asked for help. Now I was the one who had a hand in shaping the future.